Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC.
兄上様、どうかお考え直しを。
そうですとも。人間たちのためにそこまでをされる必要はありますまい。
そうはいかぬ。我らは互いを敬い、距離を保ちつつも共生せねばならぬ。
なれど日照りで辛いのは我らも同じ。
なぜに我らのみが人間に施さねばならぬか分かりませぬ。
人間たちはよく我らを敬い、この飢饉にあっても我らの土地を侵さなかった。それに対し見返りがなくば我らへの敬いも薄れようというもの。神よの時代はすでに終わって久しい。我らは滅ぶべき存在だ。しかし彼らの祖先は我らの地を侵さぬことを約束してくれたのだ。何の見返りも求めず。
しかしその見返りに我らの身を捧げるなど。
さようです。兄上様がどうして人間どもに。
話し合って決めたことだ。我を筆頭に年長の者7人を人里に送る。それで彼らは秋の実りまで十分に食いつなぐことができるであろう。我の血肉は彼らのものだけにはならぬ。我らへの敬いを新たにし、我らの安寧にもつながるのだ。
兄上様、
出産を間近にしている者もおろう。7人減ればその分多く食え、父の出も良くなるはずだ。我ら亡き後、この山を頼むぞ。
兄上様、誓って一族の繁栄をお約束いたしまする。
But they could not keep that promise. Over 7 days, 7 sacrifices were sent, believing they were fulfilling their duty. But they had no way of knowing their sacrifices would be in vain. They could never have imagined that they were stirring man's greed even further. It happened on a night where the moon appeared red. As desolate winds blew, the villagers, carrying torches, all passed over the stream to the forbidden mountain. That mere act sent the creatures living there into a frenzy, for all of them had wholeheartedly believed that the humans would never cross the stream. The mob roared as they roused the animals. The golden deer instantly understood the situation from the commotion, and learned that their trust had been betrayed. Both Suzanome and Mutsu had been opposed to it, but their words had fallen on the deaf ears of those blinded by greed. Since the village was taking care of her, Suzanome could do little to protest. And since Mutsu was a member of the village, he was unable to fight against their shared conviction. Back in those days, your village was your family, and their fate was yours. Opposing them would mean getting both yourself and your family ostracized. Mutsu knew that. So, even though he didn't want to, he had no choice but to partake in the mountain hunt. The creatures of the mountains scrambled in fear down the animal trails on the opposite slope. There they were caught in large nets. It was an ambush pincer attack designed to lure them into traps and round them a pole. Of course, what the villagers truly wanted were the golden deer. But in this time of famine, they didn't mind taking whatever they could catch. They planned to hunt the whole mountain dry. The agitated animals were caught by the herd in traps one after another. The dying screams of their slaughter resounded without any end in sight. The golden deer looked down on this horrifying scene.
なんということなのか。姉上様、もうこの地にはとどまれませぬ。
この地を捨てましょう。今ならまだ北の谷から逃げられます。
しかし北の谷は人の子らの地だ。我らの地にはあらず。人の子が金を破った以上、我らがそれに従う道理はありますまい。
さようです。彼らが我らの地を侵すように、我らが彼らの地を侵したとて誰に咎められましょう。
なりませぬ。姉上様、彼らが金を破ったからといって我らまで破れば、それは我らも同じに出したも同然。我らは神代の時代より生きし誇り高き一族。その誇りを失うことは許されませぬ。しかし悔しゅうございます。これでは何のために兄上様たちが命を捧げたのか分かりませぬ。
人の子を信じた兄上様たちが不憫でなりませぬ。
あれは人の子にあらず。人の鬼、人鬼じゃ。我らは金を破らぬ。破りで沢を越えるは人鬼に脱するも同じ。我らの誇りが人鬼どもの邪悪によっても汚されぬことを教えてやろうぞ。
いたぞ、金の鹿の群れじゃ。囲め囲め、一匹も逃すでないぞ。
The villagers' greedy eyes gleamed through the darkness, looking exactly like those of demons. The herd of golden deer suddenly took off and scattered across the mountain. But their golden fur shone too brightly in the moonlight. They couldn't escape the avaricious glares of the man-demons. One deer collapsed in exhaustion, one fell and broke its leg, and one by one they were captured. The final members of the herd were cornered at the stream. If they crossed the stream, they could likely flee to safety, but that was the humans' land. They had gained that land in exchange for promising they wouldn't trespass upon any others. And so the golden deer kept their pride to the bitter end. They were all captured with their backs to the stream.
バカな鹿どもじゃ。こいつら沢を越えられるぞ。
わしらが踏み入れるのをいいことに、お山でぬくぬくしておった報いじゃな。
一網打尽じゃぞ。
The deer's legs were bound, and the humans carried them upside down on long poles. It was a disgraceful end to the sacred deer who'd lived since the age of gods.
これだけいればわしらはみんな大金持ちじゃ。
メスの毛並みもなかなかではないか。毛皮に傷をつけぬように気をつけるのじゃぞ。
The deer were hung in succession over skinning tables set up in the village. Next, the The villagers smashed them over the head and killed them. They were no kinder to the fawns either. Even the newborns were slaughtered mercilessly. The families were forced to watch their own children murder one after another as they waited for their own turn to come. It was said the deer shed bitter tears, but no extant records speculate on their feelings.
我らはどうなっても構いませぬ。せめて子供らにはどうかお慈悲を。お慈悲を賜れれば我が身はどうなろうと決してお恨み申しませぬ。どうかお慈悲。
Crunch, 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 crunch. They smashed their skulls with countless swings of their axes.
ケンケンよく吠える鹿じゃ。あい。ほれ、すげえ。
人に立ちめ、この仕打ち、我らは永遠に忘れぬぞ。
こいつらの肉、あれだけのご利益があるんじゃ。血にもあるんではないかの。
なめたら無病息災のご利益があるやもしれぬな。
Blades were thrust into their defenseless bellies. Blood gushed out of those gaping wounds. The villagers lapped away and licked it up, staining their lips foul crimson.
まずい。こんなものにご利益があるとは思えぬわ。
殺せ。これ以上我が身を恥ずかしめることは許さぬ。
早く肉をいぶしてまた食らいつきたいもんじゃ。あのビーム思い出すだけでよだれがこぼれるわ。
The axe was raised, and the moon was split.
姉上様、お先に。
The sound of a skull shattering resounded, followed by the hiss of blood gushing.
あと一匹じゃ。
わしらのすぐ近くにこんなお宝がどっさり眠っとったなんてな。
The final doe had been forced to see all that transpired. The whole clan being captured, family young and old alike being slaughtered. Their fur skinned, their flesh carved up. The ecstasy of the man-demons at these acts, their expressions something not of this world. And last but not least, the axe coming down on her own head. Her life was coming to an end, and all the while she witnessed her adorable siblings being skinned. She wept bitterly and unleashed one final scream.
人間ども、人にどもめ。我らこそはこの地の産砂神六神彦の御事なり。この恨み、我らは永遠に忘れることはなし。必ずや天の罰を与えるであろう。我らの怒りに恐れおののくがいい。そして永遠に。
やかましい鹿じゃ。
Right after they shattered the final doe's skull, the villagers fell to the ground in shock. Something akin to black soot burst out of the wound on the doe's head like a geyser and shot straight up into the sky. The surroundings were filled with a stench the likes of which none had ever smelled before. Even after it had covered the sky and blotted out the moon, the smoke-like substance continued to gush forward. All the villagers fell to their knees and trembled at the belated realization of their own sinful natures. This was wrath. Roku Gamahiko no Mikoto's divine punishment. Eventually, something like black feathers began to rain down the village. Was it snow? No, it was pitch black soot, falling like large snowflakes. Once it started raining on them, the villagers panicked and fled into their own homes. They believed they'd be cursed if they touched them. The village square was devoid of people. What remained were the gruesome corpses of deer hung over bonfires, their extracted entrails, pools of blood, skinned meat and fur. The snow of soot piled on top of them all. It continued jetting out of the doe's head with the same ferocity as before. Everyone must have hoped it was all a bad dream. They timidly poked their heads out the next morning to find a sky so clear it made the night's events seem a fantasy. But no one was foolish enough to dismiss them as such. Not when the whole village was covered in a thick blanket of pitch-black soot. It wasn't just the houses, the square, the fields, all were the same. Everything in the village was coated in soot, as if it were a painting someone had spilled ink all over. Eventually, the winds blew it away, but the stains left by the soot's filth didn't fade.
これは一体。
何かとてつもなく恐ろしいことが起こっている気がします。
おーい、大変じゃ！見てくれ、金の毛皮が！
The villagers screamed in the square. No matter how much they pounded the sooty pelts, they never regained their former luster. They hadn't been smeared black by the soot. In the course of a single night, the golden pelts had changed into ordinary, sooty ones. To make things even stranger, the deer they'd left hanging over the fires had been reduced to nothing but bones.
ああ、なんということじゃ！金の鹿の毛皮も肉も！
何もかもなくなっちまった。
呪いじゃ！このすすは呪いのすすじゃ！
みんな大変だ。ターダを見てくれ。
Despite the long drought, a few crops had managed to grow. They'd been thriving strong just the day before, but now they lost all vitality, as if the soot had sucked the life out of them. And there was no guarantee the same wouldn't happen to the villagers. Gradually, they began to feel ill in various ways. Their breath grew short, and they developed headaches. Apparently, there were already those who had fevers or couldn't even stay on their feet.
巫女様、これはどういうことなんじゃ？やはりこれは六神様の呪いじゃろうか。わしらはどうすればいいんじゃ？
巫女様、巫女様、どうかお助けを。
私はまだ修行中の身ですゆえ何もわかりません。ですがババ様なら、あるいは
このすすは人間の体も弱らせるみたいだ。特に体力のないお年寄りたちがやられてる。
まさかババ様。
Her fears proved to be right on the mark. The old lady, who had been already bedridden with fever, was now at death's door. Her whole body was swelling and her gums were bleeding. And though she was still alive, she smelled like a rotten corpse.
ババ様、ババ様。
スースや、わしはもうダメじゃ。 だが教えてくれんかね。ゆうべから妙に騒がしい。何か恐ろしいことが起きているのではないかね。
ババ様、実は。
ババ様は何と？
これは紛れもなく六神彦の命のたたりだと。
おお、なんということじゃ。
わしらはどうなるんじゃ。死ぬんか、村は滅ぶんか。
ババ様がおっしゃるには、同じ呪いの伝承を西国で聞いたことがあるそうです。神の住まう禁足地を犯した者たちの村に呪いのすすが降り積もると。そのすすは大地を覆い土地を呪い、大きな災いを招いて村を滅ぼすのだそうです。
They couldn't abandon their village and live on. This wasn't a problem that could be solved simply by fleeing the cursed land. In this era, the death of a village meant the death of its inhabitants.
この村はどうなるんだ？どうすればいいんだ？
六神様の呪いじゃ。もうこの村は終わりじゃ。
みんな落ち着いて。取り乱してもいいことなんてないよ。
呪いだ。呪いじゃ。俺たちは全員このおしまいなんだ。
The villagers were seized with fear and anxiety. Before long, they crowded around Suzunome.
ああ、巫女様、巫女様、どうかお助けを。
どうか秘術でこの村をお救いくださいませ。
そんな、私にはそんな秘術はとても。
博識なババ様ならきっと村を救う秘術もご存知のはず。村のためにどうかよろしくお頼み申し上げまする。
It wasn't even noon, and yet the old woman's face had aged 10 years since that morning. Mitsu could see the mark of death on her. She didn't have long. She was already in bad shape to begin with, and the cursed soot had only accentuated it.
パパ様。
すずや、何を聞きたいか分かっておるぞい。
お頼み申す。どうか村を救ってくだされ。この通り。
身から出たサビじゃ。神を恐れぬ愚か者どもめ。
She barely had the strength to cough. Perhaps she understood she had limited breath left to spare.
呪い封じの秘術があるにはある。
本当ですか？
邪法じゃ。すすの呪いを制すには劣らぬほどに呪われし邪法がいる。
邪法とは。
すずや、わしの荷物から本を。
パパ様、まさかあの本ですか
？It was a dreadful tome containing the black arts. But no matter how dark the magic, it could sometimes be used for good. However, it was a spell that could not be used arbitrarily.
呪いのすすを生贄の身に封じ続けるという呪われた邪法じゃ。村をすすの呪いから救うには永遠に封じ続けるほかはない。神の怒りの代償として この村の者たちは永遠に邪法を受け継ぎ続けるのじゃ。村が滅ばずとも、あんたらのその苦しみは少しは六神様を慰めるじゃろうって。
覚悟の上です。
そして神を恐れぬ愚か者たちがどのような災いを被ったか、子々孫々まで永劫に伝え続けるのじゃ。
伝えます、伝えます。ですからどうかお助けを。
あんた字は読めるかい？
読めますとも、村で字が読めるのはわしだけです。
すすだきの秘術が記されておる。読み理解し、あんたが執り行うのじゃ。
The old woman tore out a page from the tome of black arts and gave it to the mayor. She then handed the tome to Susanome and ordered her to burn it. Finally, she whispered into Susanome's ear.
鈴やよくお聞き。お前はにまとめ、日が沈む前に
ババ様、
喉を詰まらせたんだ。
Her face grew more purple, and then, as suddenly as a puppet with its strings cut, she went limp.
しっかりしっかり。
Mitsu desperately hit her on the back, but it was too late. She'd been trying to tell Susanome something in secret, but failed to finish. The mayor glanced at Susanome weeping in her departed mentor's chest, then turned his attention to the spell page.
これが呪いのすすを封じ込める邪法。
The villagers were surrounding the hut, their faces painted with fear. Once Mitsu and the mayor exited, they crowded around and clung desperately to them. The mayor raised his hand with a grim expression and urged them to quiet down. Once he was sure he'd gotten everyone's attention, he opened his mouth.
村を救う秘術を巫女様より賜ったぞ。
The words stirred up the villagers, but the mayor quickly silenced them.
村尾さん、一体それはどのような。
生贄を一人選び出さねばならぬ。
Another commotion amongst the villagers.
静まれ！生贄は誰でも良いわけではない。若者から選ばねばならぬ。
The village youth were the most productive workers, and therefore their families breadwinners. Even if they weren't, no family would willingly offer up one of their own.
この儀式は明日の朝には行わねばならぬのじゃ。そう急に生贄を決めねばならぬ。
生贄はどうなるんじゃ。
命を奪うわけではない。呪いのすすのすべてをその身に封じ込めるのじゃ。
The village could be saved in exchange for making the sacrifice carry the full weight of the cursed soot. But this ritual would not eradicate the soot. No, it would need to be sealed by a sacrifice for all eternity.
生贄になった者はどうなるんですか？
神の呪いを一身に受けるのじゃ。楽なことではあるまい。ここにはすすを封じた生贄は長くは生きられず、やがて衰弱して死ぬとある。
でも生贄が死んだら封じ込めた呪いのすすは。
生贄が死ねば封じたすすは再び解き放たれ、村を覆ってしまう。だから生贄は死ぬ前にこうなさねばならぬのじゃ。さすれば生まれ来る赤子に再び呪いのすすは封じ込められるという。そしてその赤子もやはり若くして死ぬ。死ぬ前にまたこうなし、次なる赤子に受け継がせることで呪いのすすを封じ続けるのじゃ。
なんて恐ろしい。
皆の者よ、これだけがこの村を神の呪いから救う唯一の方法じゃ。子々孫々まで永遠に我らはこの秘術を繰り返し続けねばならぬ。
The villagers burst into an uproar. Sacrificing someone was by all means better than letting the village be destroyed. But who would it be? If it could have been anyone, one of the elderly, without much longer to live, would have likely stepped forward. But it had to be someone young, someone who could have a child. Of course, one of the sickly people couldn't bear the curse. It had to be someone healthy. The villagers all fell silent. No family could afford to offer up one of their young. Even if they could, no one would volunteer to bear such a vile curse. But they had to make a decision, and by the next morning no less. As the mayor had said, they had to hold a ritual to seal the soot away by then. The necessary preparations for that were all written down on the spell's page.
みんな、村を覆ったすすをかき集めるのじゃ。各家の長たちはわしの家へ集まっておくれ。生贄を決めねばなら
ぬ。呪いの鈴。
そう。それでこの土地の名前がすすだになったのよ。さっき鹿は神聖視されているからお年寄りは鹿の肉を食べないって言ったわよね。本当は神聖視じゃなかったの。呪いに怯えていたのよ。鹿の肉を食べたら呪われてしまうかもしれないってね。それが長い年月の中で改ざんされていって、すすだの地名からもすすが消え、今日のすすだになった。呪い元神社の名も岩井元神社に名を変え、過去を語り継ぐ伝承さえも書き換えてしまったのよ。でもどんなに過去を隠そうとしても神の怒りは永遠。邪法によって封じた呪いのすすが消え去ることはないの。
まさかその呪いのすすが現代にも。
そういうこと。それを受け継ぐ末裔の一人が私なの。本家じゃないけれどね。いわば分家。本家に比べれば私の受けてる呪いなんて可愛いものよ。
For some reason, I thought I knew exactly who she meant when she mentioned the main family. Noriyomito Shrine eventually became the Iwaihime Shrine, and the ones who ran it were the Kurakamis.
じゃあ黒髪さんは
Now, hold on a minute. Okay, sorry about that.
そうトイちゃんは1000年前の六神彦の命の呪いを現代に受け継ぐ呪われし生贄。トイちゃんが本家で私が分家。つまり私たちはものすごく遠縁の親戚にあたるというわけね。だから私にはわかるの。彼女が六神彦の命の呪いでどれだけ苦しんでいるかわかるのよ。
Then why is Suzanami the one who's experiencing all the nightmares? And they're asking about his soot. Booming music, out of sync singing, microphone feedback, bursts of flashing lights. That large room in the karaoke club was full of odious enthusiasm. The 10 members of Sho Kaminuma's delinquent group were clamoring about. Platters of fried chicken, mountains of french fries, and cups of overflowing drinks were lined up all across the table. It was too much for even 10 people. Not to mention too extravagant for students who should have had very little in the way of income.
翔さん、またジンジャーエール頼んでいいっすか？
あ、俺コーラにフランクフルト、あと漬物とか頼んじゃっていいっすか？
なんだよ漬物って、お前しびーな。 おめえらも何でも好きなもん頼めや。金ならいくらでもあんだからや。もっとハゲチーノじゃんじゃん歌え。曲切らすんじゃねえぞ。俺はよ、このイカれた大騒ぎが大好きなんだよ。あの曲が切れた時の沈黙が耐えらんねえんだよ。
うっす、翔さんごちになります。
Sho always had 10,000 yen bills in his wallet. From time to time, he'd use that vast amount of money to treat his followers to parties at the karaoke club. But in actuality, Sho rarely sang. He would always bury the table in more food than he could eat and let his lackeys go to town. To him, sitting back on the farthest sofa and looking out on it all with the presence of a boss was the greatest ego trip there was. Crouching low at Sho's feet was none other than Toei. No doubt she was going along with his sick tastes again. She licked his bare toes with her slender tongue.
つくづく翔さんの性癖ってマニアックだと思いますわ。
俺たちは高校出たら即結婚だとよ。俺は紳士だからよ。それまではフィアンセのミサオはちゃんと守るわけ。
あ、いや、許嫁とかマジ羨ますよ。どうやったら今時許嫁とか作れるわけっすか。
ああ、お前知らねえの。一目惚れだよ、こいつの一目惚れ。なんかよ、ある日突然黒髪家から俺ん家に電話があったんだよ。娘が俺に一目惚れしたからお見合いしてくんねえかってよ。なあ、おめえの一目惚れなんだよな。
はい、翔様。
すげえ、そんなことってマジであるんすね。
まあ正直会うまでは割と浮かれてたんだわ。何しろ黒髪家ってこの辺りじゃ結構知られた金持ちなんだろ。
うち親が不動産屋やってんすけど、黒髪家はマジパネっすよ。この辺りで商売やるときは黒髪に挨拶がねえとシャレになんないって言ってましたもん。
だよな。そんな大物な金持ちのご令嬢が俺に一目惚れってんだから、そりゃ浮かれるだろ。んで会ってみたら頭のネジがぶっ飛んでるイカレ女だったわけだけどよ。
どうか亀沼翔殿とのご婚約を切にご検討願いたい。
My folks were at a total loss for words. Same went for me. Who wouldn't be with these people asking me to marry their daughter?
実は娘は遺伝的な持病があり、長くは生きられません。姉の母も祖母も30を迎えるまでに亡くなりました。トエもおそらくはせいぜいあと10年ほどしか生きられないでしょう。
When I heard that, my first thought was, give me a break, man. That's some shit out of a crappy TV show. Basically, their daughter wouldn't last long, so they wanted me to marry her before she kicked the bucket, because she'd fallen for me at first sight. I got the picture. Sounds like an interesting story, yeah? But in reality, it felt like a total pain in the ass. The Kurakamis were way too formal for my tastes. I loved my freedom, and I'd be damned if I were tied down. That's the kind of guy I am. You all know that, yeah? I told Toei's old man how it was. I don't get what your deal is, but it sounds like a real pain, so I'll pass. Oh, but I ain't dumb. I worded it way nicer than that. But even then, he wouldn't give up. He said if I got engaged to his daughter, there'd be bucket loads of money in it for me. I'm talking hundreds of millions of yen here. My folks and I couldn't believe it.
もちろん、翔殿の大切な人生をお借りするのです。 これくらいは当然と思っております。トエが亡くなるまでの間、一切の金銭的なご迷惑はおかけいたしません。
He brought out a big-ass attaché case filled with bills. My folks looked like they were about to pass out any sec. I couldn't even think straight. The power of money is some real shit. The girl I'd written off as some whack job suddenly looked like the prettiest girl in the world at the moment. She'd be a fine piece of ass so long as she kept her mouth shut. On top of that, I only had to put up with her for a few years till she bit it. All that money would be mine, and all I had to do was play along with this guy's bizarre engagement game. At that point, my mind was completely made up.
もしご承諾いただけるのでしたら、当方からお願いしたいことがございます。婚礼の件です。高校を卒業と同時に直ちに婚礼を挙げていただきたく存じます。そして生まれた最初の子を当家の養子にいただきたいのです。
It all clicked together at that point. So what the Kurakamis really wanted was a successor. Their daughter would die without having a kid if she kept sitting her ass around, and they couldn't let that happen. So they decided to capitalize on her love at first sight and came up with this messed up proposal.
んで、俺は速攻 OK したってことよ。こいつは何が何でも後継ぎを産まなきゃならねえんだ。俺には逆らえねえ。俺は使い切れねえ小遣いで遊びまくり。んで卒業したらこいつの結婚ごっこに付き合ってよ。ガキができるまでやりまくるよ。何しろガキは向こうが引き取るってんだ。俺には何の後腐れもねえ。
すっげえ話っすね。
一目惚れ万々歳だぜ。イケてる面に生まれてきたことを親に感謝しねえといけねえな。なあトエ、お前俺のことが好きで仕方ねえんだよな。
はい。初めて将様をお見かけした時からトエは将様の虜です。
マジではは、イケメンはつれえわ。
Sho jeered as he hawked up some spit.
それなめろよ。一目惚れした将様の唾だぞ。ありがたくなめられるよな。
Toei nodded, crouched before Sho spit, and licked it off the floor with her tiny tongue.
おいしいよな。
はい。将様の唾、おいしいです。
Sho cackled and basked in self-satisfaction. His followers gulped at his perverted scene.
あ？曲を切らすんじゃねえよ。
すんません。おい、リモコン取れよ。
His followers hastily resumed the party. Sho clicked his tongue as he watched Toei continue to lick the floor.
てめえなんざ人間じゃねえ。犬だ。
He kicked Toei with his heel. The Japanese doll she was always carrying fell to the floor at that moment. She frantically picked it up. Her father had made one other request to Sho that he couldn't comprehend for the life of him. He asked for him to overlook the doll she always carried and not to ask any questions about it.
その人形様には嫉妬しちまいそうになるぜ。
呪いのすすには霊的な加護を失わせる効果があるの。人は誰しも程度の差はあるけど霊的な防御力を持っている。 それがなくなるというのはどういうことだと思うかしら。
霊に襲われやすくなるとか。
そういうことね。私はそれを霊による障害、霊障と呼んでいるわ。
Spirits are akin to bacteria drifting in the air. They're invisible, inaudible, and ineffective against a sound body. But the body is unable to fight them off when it's tired or sick. You know how sometimes you might catch a cold that otherwise would have been no cause for concern? Hauntings are the same. They strike when you grow emotionally unstable or weak. When all that adds up, your spiritual defenses lower, making you easy fodder for spiritual meddling. Have you ever had daydreams when you were tired or spacing out? Some of those were the result of spirits messing around with you. For people of sound mind, though, that's all they are, daydreams. But when your spiritual defenses are low, they can turn into nightmares, inviting temptations from spirits. You've heard stories every year about kids who can't get used to a new environment and jump right into trains, haven't you? Amongst them are unfortunate victims who were tempted by hauntings.
私もすっそう封じ込めた生贄の末裔だから、この体には呪いのすすが含まれてる。もちろんトエちゃんに比べればわずかなものだけど、一般の人たちとは比べ物にならないほどの霊障を受けるの。霊障を特に受けやすい思春期にはとても苦労があったわ。
Hauntings appear most frequently in adolescence, the most emotionally volatile period of most people's lives. Even those with normal spiritual defenses are easily prone to hauntings then. Many people with a fascination towards the occult in adolescence got their start from the sense of mystique they had for their own hauntings.
霊障というのはどんなものなんですか？
一言で言ってしまえば、何の予告もなく突然始まる悪夢のような白チュームね。我に返ればそれが白チュームだったと気づけるのだけれど、たちの悪いことにほとんどの場合いつから悪夢が始まっていたのか全くわからないの。
As for recent hauntings, right, take Susada Station. It's not a big station, yet it's been known as a suicide hotspot, right? The spirits there must have called out to them. On that day, I was waiting for a train. Then, all of a sudden, I heard an office worker talking on the phone or something nearby. I was bored and had nothing better to do, so I listened in. What I heard was disturbing. She was talking about how it was okay to just jump onto the tracks and reset everything if you felt at the end of your rope. But disturbing as it was, the more I listened, the more fascinating I found it. Then suddenly, I realized it was almost as though she were talking to me instead. Next, I saw a blue sky under the train platform. There was a lush field at the bottom of it. At that moment, I remembered thinking how wonderful it would feel if I were to be sucked right into it.
その時、たまたま誰かに肩をぶつけられ、我に返ったの。我に返って初めて、直前までのそれらが霊障による白チュームであると気づくのよ。
もし肩をぶつけられていなかったら。
考えるのも恐ろしいわね。実際過去には霊障に惑わされて赤信号の横断歩道に飛び出してスクーターに接触したこともあるわ。あれがもし大型トラックだったら私はここにいないでしょうね。死に引きずり込んでくるような霊障は幸いにも稀よ。ほとんどの霊障は単に不気味だったりグロテスクだったりで不快なだけ。まあ その不快なだけというのでも十分に答えるんだけれどね。
Even if a sound person only had a nightmare once in a while, they would still wake to find themselves drained of both strength and spirit. So it wouldn't be hard to imagine how tiring it would be to go through that sort of thing on a daily basis.
成人すれば次第に収まっていくけれどね。とにかく思春期が一番辛いのよ。彼女たちが傍目にはぼんやりしているだけにしか見えなくても、私には分かったの。霊障に苦しむ私と同じ呪いのすすを封じた生贄の末裔だとね。
先生の他にも生贄の末裔がいるんですね。まさか。
消失した古文書の写しによるとね、昔生贄に呪いの負担がかかりすぎて子を産む前に死んでしまいそうになったんですって。その時秘術によって生贄のすすを5つ子に分けたと伝えられるの。
そのうちの一人の末裔が黒髪さんで、一人が先生で、
残りの3人の末裔が誰かもう想像がついてるわね。
じゃあシャチホコ部というのは。
5人の末裔が同じ学校にいるなんて、これはある種の奇跡だわ。私はシャチホコ部を作り彼女たちを集めたの。少しでも霊障を和らげてあげることができないかって思ってね。
Kiko, Minobe, and Lydia. They were all descendants of the original sacrifice to the cursed soot, and Miss Hinagata ran the infirmary. She must have realized some of the students she treated were suffering from hauntings. It really was quite the miracle.
じゃあキコちゃんも霊障を。
当時は貧血と白チュームに悩まされると言ってちょくちょく保健室を訪れていたわ。美濃部さんも布川さんもわけのわからない白チュームで辛い、これは何かの病気なのかと言ってね。でも今は少なくとも3人についてはだいぶ霊障も和らいだと思うわ。
霊障は抑える方法があるんですか？
あるわ。一番効果的なのは徳を得ること。
The LCSC performed community service, and by contributing to society, you receive thanks from others.
良い行いや人々の尊敬や感謝を得ると、人は幾ばくかの霊的防御力を得られるの。日頃の行いって言い方があるでしょ。良い行いをする人は運気に恵まれ、悪い行いをする人は運気を失う。
つまり大昔の人は良い行いが霊的な力を宿すと知っていたんですね。
そういうこと。つまり霊障には社会奉仕活動が一番効果的というわ
With that, I understood why the SLCSC existed. But wait, what did that mean for Natsu and me? Kiku and I were related, though distantly. Does that mean I had the cursed soot in my body too?
け。それはないわ。呪いのすすは最初の子供に全て引き継がれるの。だからすすはらくんには呪いは引き継がれていないわ。もちろんゼロというわけではないだろうけれど、それでも微量の問題ない量だと思うわ。
ではどうして僕と夏くんを？
私が霊障に苛まれていた時、すすはらくんと厚田くんの2人がやってきたら霊障が晴れたの。そんな経験は初めてだったわ。私はあなたたち2人のどちらかに不思議な力があるのではないかと思ったの。そしておそらくその力はあなたにあったようね。あなたが修行しているという神前武術、 それのおかげでしょうね。
The divine tribute style was a sacred thing, dedicated to God. According to Miss Hinagata, that which was spiritually pure held the power to erase hauntings.
ススハラ君には霊障を和らげる力が、そしてアツタ君には賑やかにしてみんなを明るくする力が。あなたたち2人のおかげでみんなは健やかに学校生活を送ることができるのよ。あなたたちが来てから体調はどうかとみんなに尋ねたわ。そしたら効果はてきめん。ススハラ君がやってきてから気持ちの悪い白昼夢を見る数が減った気がすると3人からそれぞれ返事があったわ。
それが僕がシャチホコ部に招かれた理由だったんですか。
信じてくれる？こんな突拍子もない話。
疑いなんかしないです。僕は理由も分からず今日までずっと修行を続けてきました。それがみんなの役に立てると分かったんだから、なんだか嬉しいです。
信じてもらえてよかったわ。先生がおかしなことを言い出した。 PTA で大騒ぎ、学校追放なんてならないか心配だったのよ。
話してくださってありがとうございます。僕でお役に立てることがあるなら何でも協力したいです。
ありがとう、ススハラ君。あなたが来てからみんなの霊障はかなり収まってるけど、たまに発作的に大きな霊障にやられてしまう時もあると思うの。そんな時助けてあげてほしいの。あなたが近くにいてくれるだけで霊障は霞のように散ってしまうのだから。
お安いご用です。いつでも呼んでください。僕ももっと修行に励まなくちゃ。そうすることで救ってあげられる人たちがいるんだから。
That's right. I had to save them, no matter what.
なら僕には黒髪さんも救ってあげられるでしょうか。
だといいのだけれど、トエちゃんは最も濃く呪いの思想を受け継ぐ生贄の末裔の本家。きっとシャチホコ部で彼女の霊障も少しは和らいでると思うけれど。
彼女はほとんどいつも心ここにあらずという感じです。あれは霊障なんですよね。
そうよ。昔はあれほどじゃなかったそうね。小学校の高学年になったくらいからみるみる悪化したんですって。
How awful. So she spent nearly the entire day trapped in hauntings, so bad she could barely hold a proper conversation. That was her day-to-day life.
先生、彼女がいつも抱いているあの人形は何ですか。今となっては何か大切な意味があるように思います。
あれは1000年前から現代に受け継がれた唯一の秘術。人形は古来から人間の不幸の身代わりとされてきたわ。言うなれば不幸を吸い取ってくれる脱脂麺みたいなものね。だから古い人形にはたくさんの不幸が染みついてる。人形供養というのはそういう人形に染みついた不幸を払うための儀式なのよ。
つまり黒髪さんのあの人形は自分の霊障を和らげるための。
そう。学校の子たちには呪いの人形なんて言われて怖がられているけれど、実際は逆。彼女の呪い、霊障を和らげるための大切な人形なのよ。
It seemed it wasn't an ordinary Japanese doll. It was a special doll to ward off evil, made solely for Toei Kurakami. Sadly, They only knew how to make dolls to ease the hauntings of the Kurakami family sacrifice. No one could make such a doll for Kiko and the others.
本来は一つの人形で7月は持つ強い霊力のある人形のはずなのにね。トエちゃんの代になってから人形の消耗が早すぎるの。効きもかなり悪くなってる。これはいい傾向ではないわ。
この人形供養殿に供養されている人形、まさか。
I took another look out at the countless dolls lining the hall. They were all the same size, bore the same presence, and their long black hair reminded me of Kurakami's. People said Iwaimoto Shrine had become a doll memorial shrine, but in reality...
そう。この人形供養殿は、本来は一般の人の人形を供養するためのものじゃないの。黒髪家の生贄たちを慰めてきた人形が、ここで供養されているのよ。
Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is Audapostrophe. You've been watching Iwaihime on PC. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.